G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic start to the week. Now, just as a disclaimer before we get into any of this, it is incredibly hard to know what exactly is going on right now in, of course, the Kursk Oblast. There's so much information coming out, there's so much propaganda, there's so much misinformation being pushed around everywhere, videos being recycled, geolocations of areas. It is very difficult, but we will get more of an idea in the coming days and weeks on exactly what happened and exactly then what is happening. So it is very hard to get an idea on, yes, this X, Y, Z is happening. So today we're going to look at the maps and see where areas have shifted. We're going to look at a large breakdown as well, something I was reading through and I'm like, I just want to share this all with you about how this particular guy sees it, very knowledgeable guy, about the successes, the failures, how this occurred, and then what maybe the future of this then is. We'll also look at a little bit of footage here and there. Now, I've been telling you for a couple of days in yesterday's video, but for 6 months, I have been warning as well. If and when we see desperation grow on the battlefield, which in a war of which there's said to be no negotiations, well, then things have to be won militarily. Therefore, you have to have a winner and a loser. So at some point, things are going to grow desperate that there is going to be an increased risk, an increased likelihood of seeing some sort then of false flag events. Now, I'm not saying that this is one, but I'm saying just to keep your eyes open to this. And we talked about power plants yesterday in Kursk, 6 months ago, even 12 months ago, actually almost 2 years ago, we spoke about the ZNPP in Enerhodar and Zaporizhzhia Oblast. And today we have footage coming out of a large fire here. Now, what happened here? Let me show you a quick squiz at the footage. So this is the first video that came out. So we see pouring out of black smoke out of one of these then cooling stacks here with the fire underneath. We then get actually better footage as well. So we see this hot fire burning then underneath here and that thick black smoke pouring up out of there. Now, Russia has said that Ukraine shelled this and with drones shelling and caused a fire. Ukraine is saying that Russia is burning tires here. So take that as you will. It's hard to get an idea. We're going to look at what the International Atomic Energy Agency, the safety agency globally, has said as well. And what a contact of mine has also said for the ZAP power plant. Nothing typically in a water cooling tower should produce black smoke. So as you mentioned, it's either munitions or the tire theory has some credibility. I'm more interested why. When you consider that Kursk also has a nuclear plant and the Ukrainians are closing in around it, the threat of nuclear accidents might get the West to pressure Ukraine to stop their offensive. The only thing I disagree on that is Ukraine in Kursk Oblast. We'll have a look at the maps closer, but we can see the nuclear power plant is just on the south side of Kursk. It's still a long way away from here, and we can't only talk as far as distance one way. To have a push further, it needs to grow wide too. So a push into here would be a very, very major offensive action. Is it possible? Yes. Is the nuclear power plant under threat here at the moment? No, but we do know there must be some threat because Russia is reportedly reinforcing around that power plant. Now, one thing I want to say, these are cooling towers. This isn't the reactors themselves that are in cold shutdown. And I've made up this quick little infographic for you here. These are basically steam hot water in here. This is where we get then the skin blistery Chernobyl style stuff that you do not want. And the IAEA has said that there is no radiation threat here. That International Atomic Energy Agency experts at the power plant witnessed thick dark smoke coming from the northwest area of the plant. After hearing multiple explosions throughout the evening, the team was informed that an alleged drone attack on one of the plant's cooling towers took place today. There is no impact on nuclear safety. The team reported hearing an explosion today. At the same time, ZNPP informed them the drone had allegedly struck one of the plant's 2 cooling towers. Ascertain the extent of the possible event. They're requesting immediate access to this tower to have a look what is actually going on here. Now, one thing I will say, power plant, this particular one, biggest one in Europe, but it was also Soviet era built. Everything in the Soviet Union, basements, bridges, things like this, was on the idea that there was going to be wider war, plus it's a nuclear power plant. You have feet, meters of concrete. Therefore, am I saying attacks or lighting fires or anything is good to, no, of course I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is these are a very, very reinforced target, and to cause a like a major meltdown here from explosion is going to be very, very major. Of course, this should be absolutely out of play, hide and seek in the roof with your brother. You're not allowed to do. But regardless, still a very, very hardened target. ZNPP has 2 cooling towers located on the northern side of the cooling pond outside the perimeter of the ZNPP. So I showed you on the blister map. Cooling towers are used during power operation of the plant. The damage does not directly impact the safety of the 6 units in shutdown. There is no risk of elevated radiation, and there is no radioactive material in the vicinity of the alleged attack. The director has reiterated any military action against the power plant represents a clear violation of 5 concrete principles for protecting the facility. These reckless attacks endanger nuclear safety at the plant and increase the risk of nuclear accident. They must stop now. Going into a little bit of what my colleague said here about could there be something going on here to try and have external pressure on movements towards another power plant. And I again speak about false flags. I'm not calling this one, but I'm saying that I think we are daily at an increased risk of this. Now, a lot of people are suggesting that there's going to be a second wave of troops through Kursk. I don't know that. I don't think anyone but maybe senior command know this, but what we have seen is we are seeing a lot, and I can't show you all the footage, I don't think, I don't know, but there are a lot of videos coming out, it'll be on the Telegram, of a lot of Russian POWs taken, as well as ones said to be from Akhmat as well. Now, some have actually asked me before, is the reason Ukraine is having or has been having manpower shortages in the Donbass in the south, is the reason for those manpower shortages due to the build-up secrecy for this push across into Kursk? Now, I'm not going to say that there is no effect, but the amount of troops we have actually seen Ukraine push into Kursk with isn't that great amounts. Now, it's very hard to get an idea of how many due to people are assuming that battalions and brigades and platoons are full, and we'll speak about that in a second and where the numbers may actually be sitting. But let's say it's in the few thousands that took that large swath of land. That isn't the amount of soldiers that Ukraine likely needs to mobilise for offensive actions in the east and south against those heavily built up areas. So the mobilisation for those areas, we have been talking in the numbers in the vicinity of a few 100,000 to 500,000 soldiers. In here, we're probably talking low thousands, maybe 10,000. It really depends on those numbers. I'm not going to give you a firm answer because I don't know. I think there'd be very few people who actually really do know. But is this directly because of that? I'm not going to say it has no effect, but it's not in the amount of troops that we would think are needed to mobilise for the south and east. So let's have a look at a bit of footage just to keep you interested. And we see here that there is Russians travelling in the back of like a flatbed here, and they see an FPV drone then coming towards them. You can see this just here, that it is not ours, and that the electronic warfare was not working on this drone, and that we see, I will say, a Turkish man at the Olympics level shot into that drone, especially with a rifle, not a shotgun. And they say here, EW doesn't work. Good shot on that. And I see a lot of people questioning, oh, like, why would you even bother having shotguns and stuff? Well, if I was in an area like this, I would much rather have a shotgun and try than not have it. And that the EW didn't have then an effect. And we do know there are ways around EW. We do question the effectiveness of EW, but I do think maybe the EW may have had an effect because you can't see what's traveling in front of this vehicle. Maybe it was going over this one to hit something, but it was traveling over them. And you see then the explosion of it. Maybe EW actually did hit it and it stopped going in. I don't know. But we do know the EW effectiveness on drones, even from guys I know that work in the drone space and EW space, it's nowhere near as the defensive capability for drones is not even close to the offensive capability of these cheap drones, especially now that we're seeing drones with fiber optic tow cable on them, working like a tow missile or a Cornet missile that cannot be jammed at all. So let's have a look at a couple of maps. We've got War Mapper, Syriac hasn't given one, and then the Noel Reports interactive map here. Now, we can see, and as we'll speak about in a second, we can see that the amount of land taken on the initial days has really slowed down as reserves have started to arrive, and as you're going to need to reinforce your own troops with logistics and rotation, as well as it's getting larger and larger. The amount of ground you actually have to taking ground's one thing, holding that ground is another. And that's the element of which we are most likely in right now. I forgot to we'll look at other areas on the maps too. So we see a small pocket of land across here has also been taken, but this is the Ukrainian-Russian border right here, has been taken up here. This is what we reported on yesterday, as well as another pocket down in here. We reported on this out to Poroz yesterday as well as this other pocket we reported on as well. So opening up some other areas. This is what we spoke about over the last couple of days too. You may open up other areas while there is a distraction as troops move in to then open up somewhere else. What one of my contacts said was, could offensive around here try, if it was somewhere around here into Belgorod, try and actually cut off these Russian forces in Volchansk here. This is, of course, a long way west. But what changes do then we see today? So we're looking through for things on the 11th and 12th. So we did actually see, I reported yesterday in Plekhovo, this is where Syriac said there was an update. This map didn't show it at that time. It's now showing this movement in here as well. Suja, we're going to talk about, is this fully occupied or not? It's hard to tell, as well as then other pieces, other pockets like this on the 11th and this on then the 12th. But we can see on the 12th that compared to the days prior, there is significantly less ground made. And what we've been saying is that is while Ukraine have moved in to try and then reinforce and hold those positions, consolidate those gains, other than the grey zone movements where we have seen then the presence of troops compared to the consolidation and holding of that. And I wouldn't even be surprised if we actually see a shrink in this to try and consolidate land. We did see very similar to this down for the Russians in Volchansk. Then the push in and further, especially down and around this area, and then a pullback to consolidate those positions. So no huge shifts, at least showing on this map today. Now Syriac, I'm too used to saying it. War Mapper, I can't use this. War Mapper then shows this offensive update. Ukraine is now confirmed to control at least 320 squared kilometers of Kursk Oblast. So this, of all the maps, is probably showing, I think, the least confirmed. As he is saying, a significant grey zone persists in some areas as further verification is required to confirm reported clashes and assess consolidation between the known forward elements. Now, what you can see in this is 320 is confirmed and a hell of a lot remains in grey zone or presence of soldiers as well, like we have spoken about. You'll see some say that 700 square kilometres is confirmed under control. And what he's saying here is that there's need to be more verification to say that this is where that is. And I will point out, War Mapper is very, very conservative towards really any gains throughout the years we have been reporting on this. But it's interesting to have a look at where the different maps then are showing. And he actually put up this as well, just as a comparison of the amount of ground Ukraine has got in Kursk compared to the amount of ground Russia then got down in Kharkiv, just for having a look at the comparison of these two. I find that interesting to have a look then at. So let's have a look at the other areas of the map, and then we'll actually come back to here and we will then talk about what Ukraine's goal may be here, what success is going to be here, maybe what are then the next movements here for Ukraine and for Russia. So here is the map. Of course, we have Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv, red areas occupied since 2022, the purple since 2014. The blue areas gained under 2 weeks. In here, this map is not keeping up with what is happening in the north. I have no idea why. I thought it would be the best possible thing currently. And the green is blue once it goes over 2 weeks. Now, there's something in here I'm not sure on, so we will talk about it. So this is where we saw the gains yesterday around Tabayevka, Kislivka, Berestove. So if we go back to yesterday, switch this on just to get an idea of where this movement is. And then today, we see just in here, a Ukrainian movement here. Now, you can correct me, but I think this is a map correction, not Ukrainian movement, because in the this should be blue if it's movement under 2 weeks. So it may be footage has come up that's older than 2 weeks old that shows Ukrainian presence in here. I can be completely wrong. This could be a Ukrainian advancement, but I'm not 100% sure. I think because it's green check, it's a map correction. Otherwise, it should be blue. Either way, let's then continue down to the South Pass, Bakhmut, no changes in here. And then this is an area which is important to speak about, of course, the Donetsk-New York front. Now, the last remaining segment of 2014 defensive line was where this purple, or just west of this purple here. Now, today, this has come under Russian control, then falling back in here between these pincers of Zelezny and New York, as well as a further push down Pevnechny here. Now, I'll be waiting to see what Syriac's map updates says about this in the next day or two, but a further widening out to the west towards Alexandropol too. This is important because there are positions in here that have held for now over 10 years, and that has, over the past, say, month, then actually pushed in to here. And the question is, these, of course, are going to be incredibly well-built, well-defended, decade-old lines. What then has been built up to the same degree then behind this? It's interesting to look at the movement there. Then we'll continue moving down to the south, and we can't see any other red on this map here. I thought we had another movement, but I could be incorrect. Krasnohivka, Novomaylivka, no, we don't. So that is the only other map update I have for you today in here. So let's swing across back onto this map. Now, area we'll have to know is Rilsk in here too as we go through this. So full credit to then Emil Kastahelny from Blackbird. This is really great. I'm just going to go through it, go follow them. Full credit to that. The Kursk Offensive situational update. The operation has been ongoing for almost a week. During the last days, Ukraine has not made very significant progress, but they have started solidifying their positions in the newly captured area. Like we spoke about in the beginning, push out, try and solidify. I wouldn't even be surprised if we see actually a pullback into better positions. Suja, Beletsi, these are areas you're going to need to know, as well as Korenovo out here. And we can see where these two maps, if we compare the two, are showing some difference and some movement just down to the south here. But Suja on this doesn't show as fully under Ukrainian control like other maps, and this is only a few hours old. So maybe just hold out. A lot of people saying you pour too much cold water on things. I just want to know what is actually happening, even from a few days old. As expected, it took Russia a few days to transfer units to the area, and they will likely continue to do so in the coming days. With their current forces, the Russians have managed to prevent any more serious breakthroughs from happening, and local counterattacks have started. So in those first days, we saw a few hundred square kilometres fall. We are seeing 25, 70, 50 in the days prior. So no of those massive breakthroughs like we saw in the beginning. Russians are likely still holding some central and eastern parts of Suja, while the Ukrainians are continuing operations in the area. At Martinovka, Russians counterattacked and likely pushed the Ukrainians out of the village. Reportedly, Ukrainians are trying to get it back. So there's a hell of a lot of fighting going on in many different areas through Suja as well. If I show you actually on his map, may then be easier. I have deleted it. I'll try and show you it up here. In the direction of Korenovo, so up in here, Ukrainians have not been able to enter the city, at least not with large force. So like we've spoken about, your DRG element's presence isn't then that there is a holding of that is under control. There are some uncertainties in the zones of control, especially on the western and northern flanks of the area of operations. Russia still doesn't have a solid control of the front line or the state border. For example, yesterday evening, multiple Russian channels reported Ukraine operating deep in the direction of Belitsia. Sabotage and reconnaissance groups still seem to get through elsewhere too. Russia is having success crossing in other spots, and this is something we've spoken about. A byproduct of this is going to be Even if this pulls back, Russia is going to have to allocate a shitload of resources to reinforce the whole border line, both manpower and resources. The general situation of the Kursk offensive doesn't look particularly good. After a week of fighting, neither Koronove or Sudzha are fully in Ukrainian control. So these are the major areas here. And the Russians have also likely blocked the northern direction. This isn't a very desirable situation. So likely blocked out to the north, and the two main areas here aren't under control. However, for Ukraine, the situation isn't particularly bad either. They are still holding on to most of the ground gained despite Russian counterattacks. Even with more Russian troops in the general area, Ukraine still holds the initiative. In this area, they do hold the initiative, pushing through and have held on to the majority of ground here. And these counterattacks and pieces, it is so hard to know, because you're also getting a DRG element somewhere and people going, they hold this area, and then Russia pushing them out going, Russia's recaptured this area. The truth is it was only ever contested. Does that make sense? It's how you can spin things to fit away. After more Russian reinforcements arrive, operational success is increasingly difficult to achieve. More soldiers are going to be pouring into it. That's why it may open somewhere else. And there's less room for the element of surprise. Committing more troops also increases risk, especially as the situation in eastern Ukraine is still difficult. This is something that's forgotten about. The situation east, like we just showed you, is still very difficult, with areas still pushing forward in that attritional style warfare there. But that less room for the element of surprise. So we spoke about, I think the biggest win here for Ukraine is knowing that the OPSEC was tight as shit, and they've flushed out anyone who's going to leak that OPSEC out of senior command. But there still was this scene coming across by a lot of ISR assets and reinforcements. And like I've put here, this is what my friend was saying in his messaging about a blitzkrieg all the way in. That like in the slide we just spoke about, that elements have been suppressed in a way, neither Koronove or Sudzha are fully in control, and that it does look like it's mostly blocked on the northern direction. Now, oh my God, this is then what my friend said to me, that what it was, blitzkrieg all the way in, and what he put this down to was that the ISR was not suppressed enough. And this is something we see in the footage. We saw on day one of this occurring, which we had no idea how large this was going to go to, we saw Ukrainian vehicles moving on the Ukrainian side and on the Russian side too. Now, I will say, something I should have said in this was his subjective experience. That said, he's very experienced, very knowledgeable guy. Now, apparently for displaying his experience here, I've been painted as a Kremlin agent, even if this is a guy I know well. He's been in the UAF for a very long time. I met him both in country, out of... Anyway, regardless, that was his experience and his understanding of what was happening. And I think this links in a little bit what with this other guy is saying here too. There have been Russian rumours about Ukraine soon launching an attack either towards Rilsk or Glashkovo. So we showed you Rilsk before. So out then to the north here. So north of where we're seeing this, and an easterly then push to expand the control. They could achieve some success there, but there would be limited effect to the general situation. The most valuable places in Kursk Oblast would still be safe. So the really valuable places in Kursk, we're talking about Kursk itself or other major areas of control that, not to sound like a Gleshkov or Rilsk, that these are still smaller villages in here and controlling a lot more than land. The main question is, what can Ukraine achieve if it spends more manpower and equipment to take more border villages in the Kursk direction? There's a limited amount of benefit to be gained from simply controlling more land. The more land you control, the more land you need to defend as well and supply to. Now, let's continue. A larger land area would, of course, have more weight in possible peace negotiations in the future. Even if Ukraine were able to reach the Rilsk-Koronova-Sudzha line, it would likely be less valuable than many of the territories currently occupied by Russia in Ukraine. So what he's talking about here is if there is a full push, even if this comes something like, let's say, this, really, really rough, and there is a large expansion on there, that it's still maybe less valuable than many of the territories occupied by Russia. Look at Crimea, Donetsk, things like this in peace negotiations. Square metre for square metre, things aren't worth the same, if that comes to make sense. And this is going into that there's going to be is there going to even be a negotiation? Some have argued that expanding the zone of control could force the Russians to shift their focus to Kursk at the expense of other directions. Because of political reasons, I'm not entirely convinced the Russians will do this, as there are other possible scenarios too. So will the Russians shift their focus away from areas where they have the initiative in the east to focus on here and try and stop this? And if you read anything about the most amount of stuff we know about sort of like spy agencies, whatever, is defectors out of the KGB or people out of the KGB when the Soviet Union fell. And there was an obsession with optics rather than what is effective. And that went through a lot of Soviet society and other Soviet states and satellite states too. So much focus on optics rather than what is mission critical. And there was so much focus on irrelevant political movements that the full intelligence agency was just massive on trying to stop, rather than like actionable intelligence that would actually make a difference. And we see that in military decisions being made too. And also Ukraine and Russia, of a massive focus on optics rather than what's changing larger maybe picture. It's possible the Russians would try to freeze the front and let Ukraine stay in the occupied area, assuming that the issue of a few dozen towns and villages can be solved in future negotiations, as the priority is to achieve the set political goals inside Ukraine. So, yep, give up that area of the front, freeze that, and we'll swap this back at some point. I said the exact same thing when when Russia pushed into Ukrainian territory, Vovchansk-Lipsy. Freeze it, sort it out at a later on. It's not worth the massive allocation of taking on maybe a fight there. And that's larger strategic goals, not tactical. In this situation, and you can go back and watch those, in this situation, some additional Ukrainian forces would be tied to guard and hold expanded secondary direction, while the fight in Donetsk, Zap, Luhansk, Kharkiv would continue just as intensively. The Kursk offensive is increasingly beginning to look like a medium risk, medium reward operation. There's no massive game-changing objectives to be achieved, but there's no likely catastrophes on the horizon. Now, I somewhat am coming around to medium risk, medium reward. I still think this is high risk, high reward. I think there is a high reward if they can get these major areas, both PR, morale on the front, showing Russia that the West has basically given them permission to actually use weapons inside Russia, bring the war to Russia, the success they can have, especially if they can reach areas like Kursk. This is a long way out. So I think there's been a lot of maybe PR victory there too, that Russia will be worried about. Hey, America hasn't shut down Ukraine for using a X vehicle across here. So I think there is some wins there, but I still think it is very high risk too, because if this does start and you do get cut off from that border and you can't bring logistics, I think there is high risk there too. The best case scenario for Ukraine would probably be the following. Russia decides it's not acceptable to leave any areas to Ukrainian hands and will divert significant resources even from the most critical places and get every square kilometre back despite the losses. This is what we're talking about, that obsession with optics, that this is drawing guys away. And we could just see, and like I said about Vovchansk, I think we could see a withdrawal out of here as quickly as we saw this push in. If you get all those assets getting redirected to here, and then you pull out and you hit somewhere else very hard or hit somewhere else. I think this is still very high risk, high reward, and we haven't seen where the balance of that yet is. This would severely attrit the Russians, raise the pressure in other directions, and maybe even make it possible for Ukrainians to improve the tactical situation locally in the east. However, as usual, the reality most likely set somewhere in between. We have heard talking about this November peace summit, whatever it's going to be, that there needs to be enough pressure before then on Russia to come to the table. And how is this pressure going to be added, not only from outside states, but from Ukraine then itself? So could this improve the situation in the east? Again, probably, like he says, somewhere in the middle. Regardless of whether Ukrainians continue their advance, they have proved the occupation of relatively large areas is no longer a privilege of Russia. The war is now even more concrete, a war on Russian soil as well. So bringing it home to Russia, to the average then Russian. And Russia must take this into account in many ways. So that is very true as well. The victory goes beyond just the ground made. It's the message to the Kremlin. It's the message to the West. It's the message then internally within too. Now, is ex-Ukrainian officer, he also talks about this. There's been numerous articles and statements on Telegram channels about the movement of Russian and Ukrainian reinforcements to the front line, specifically Kursk area, and I think it's important to address a few points. Both Ukraine and Russian forces face the same issue. Battalions are often pulled from their brigades to reinforce weaker sections of the front line. This means that when they hear a brigade has now moved, it might actually refer to only 1 or 2 battalions, so not the entire brigade. We're now at a stage in the war where battalions can be easily reinforced companies due to shortages in manpower and vehicles. So the actual amount can be significantly less than what that is. So it might be quarter brigade, battalion, whatever, but it may be more company plus size. This applies to both sides, as both Russia and Ukraine have created many new units and rapidly expanded their structures, but lack enough personnel to fully staff then existing units. However, Aussie analysis, and this is not a criticism, just noting limitations, often use FPV drone footage to identify the presence of specific units. For example, if X brigade posts a drone video from the Kherson area, it must be concluded that X brigade is operating there. However, native UAV units can be deployed separately for specific operations due to their mobility and effectiveness. Additionally, both Ukrainian and Russian forces have used this for disinformation, deliberately uploading videos from different locations with their logos to confuse the enemy. And this is the thing, in like say an infantry battalion where I've experienced, you've got elements that can work completely independently. So look at maybe the snipers, they could be attached to a completely other unit in a different area of operations to the remainder of then the battalion that I was part of, and you have different maneuver support elements, you have bits getting attached here, there, and everywhere. It makes a good point there. And just because you see this drone footage with thing, it could be information, or it could just be these guys jump in a full drive a couple of Ks, and they're dropping bombs. Overall, when you read statements like another Ukrainian brigade has been spotted in Kursk, a Russian regiment from Thankyou is heading to Kursk, it can mean anything from a company-sized battalion moving to a full brigade with thousands of personnel or dozens, even hundreds of vehicles. Really great point to make. Legends, I hope you look after yourself. You will see me in my office very soon. I'll speak to you tomorrow. I hope. I've got another 8-hour drive. Anyway, have a great week. I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.